Well, welcome to the final episode of Season 3 of Planet Possible. Each episode, we've delved into the detail behind the really big issues that are critical to the way we manage our water and environment. We've heard directly from leading figures across the sector from around the world and practitioners who are making a difference every day through their work. A huge thanks to Binny's, who are our season sponsor for Season 3 and made it possible to bring Planet Possible to you. You'll hear a little bit more about Binny's later, and we're really grateful for their support. And a quick plug, if you'd like to explore sponsoring Season 4 with us, then do get in touch. I'm Niki Roach, and alongside being a passionate advocate for all things water and environment, I'm a fellow of CIWEM. And if you're new to the pod, CIWEM is the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management, and our members in over 90 countries are professionals with a breadth and crucially depth of expertise in the topics that are shaping the future of our planet. In today's episode, we're exploring innovation in the water sector, a pretty broad topic to get stuck into. So luckily we're joined by an expert co-host to help us stay focused, Angela MacOscar. Angela is the Head of Innovation at Northumbrian Water, a water and wastewater company here in the northeast of England, serving 4.5 million customers. So, hello Angela, it's great to have you with us.
Hi Niki, great to be here.
Angela and I are going to listen to our guest interview together and then we'll discuss our reflections. And our guest interview today is with Paul O'Callaghan, the founder and CEO of Bluetech Research and also a documentary producer. And we'll hear more about how you could get involved in his next project in today's interview. Paul is focused on solving the global water crisis, and his film, Bwlb, featuring Matt Damon, Jaden Smith and Liam Neeson, was designed to raise awareness about exactly that issue. I was really interested to hear Paul sharing how ancient innovative technologies are playing a role in the way that we're now managing water for some of our mega cities.
One that I find particularly fascinating is in Peru, where they had these ancient canals that were called amunas. They were created to capture snowmelt coming down the slopes of the Andes Mountains, and they would slow it down so that it would percolate slowly into the ground. And that was really by the Wari culture, which were pre-Incan. Those are being brought back into service today. They're being regenerated, restored, rediscovered, and they're helping provide water for modern-day Lima, like a megacity of 10 million people.
So, Angela, before we hear the interview with Paul, can you give me a sense of the innovation landscape in the water sector that you work in across England and Wales?
So I think it's a really exciting time to be in this space in the water sector in the UK. There is so much going on, and you will have seen, well, you can't help fail to see that we've really put in the spotlight at the moment with our customers. And although that this is not all positive, I actually think that by raising the profile of the importance of water with our customers is actually going to be ultimately really helpful, because it needs to be top of mind, helping customers think about how they can use water in the most appropriate of manners. Just raising that awareness, although not probably feeling quite good for everybody at the moment, but I thought ultimately will pay off.
And do you think we need to be innovative in the way that we do raise that awareness with customers?
Absolutely. We all just expect water to come out of our taps, and really the only time that we ever think about a water company is when it doesn't work, when something's gone horribly wrong. That's such a shame and such a missed opportunity. Water is like the most valuable thing that we have, and yet we don't value it. My past life, I did 17 years in the fast-moving goods industry. So I sold and made products to customers, and the level of insight and detail that we knew and understood these customers, understood their relationship with products and really helped them use their products in the best way. We don't do any of that in the water sector, and that will be the key to us working hand in hand with our customers to really value water and really make the most of this very, very valuable resource.
Great intro to the discussion that we're about to hear with Paul. So probably time to get into it. Here's the interview. So Paul, welcome to Planet Possible.
Hey Niki, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Tell me, in your view, what's driving innovation at the moment in the water sector? Why are people innovating?
When we look at it from a Bluetech perspective, and I've studied this for quite some time now, actually, did a PhD in the topic, we could see that there's really two different types of innovation drivers. There was value-driven and there was also crisis-driven. So, quite a lot of innovation is driven by trying to make things better, faster, cheaper, more efficient, consume less energy, use less footprint, and it's quite predictable. And the other type of innovation is more crisis and needs driven, where we absolutely have to do this because there's a new piece of legislation that requires it, or we simply don't have any water and we've got to do something. We've got to fix the leaks. And there's also, of course, sustaining innovation, which always goes on, where an existing product is improving at maybe 2% a year would be kind of typical on average. So we see both types, but I think what we see at the moment with the effects of climate change becoming so dramatic over the past 6 months that that level of crisis-driven innovation is only accelerating.
And specifically, where are you sort of seeing that manifesting? So, we are experiencing an energy crisis, definitely at the moment, exacerbated by the conflict in Ukraine. Are you seeing that manifesting in terms of innovation in the sector?
Yeah, it's amazing. We've been attending various different conferences over the past few months. It permeates almost every conversation. We're finding we're being asked about, say, PFAS destruction and whether or not the increasing cost of electricity will make it more costly to destroy PFAS electrolytically, which might mitigate towards using activated carbon. But then in turn, people are asking, but what about the energy cost of regenerating activated carbon? Is that going to mitigate towards importing cheaper, new virgin Chinese carbon? We see chemical companies and utilities focusing on carbon diversion from primary treatment to push it towards the digesters and away from the aeration basins to increase the biogas because that's more valuable, and to decrease the electricity consumption because that cost is going up. And on-site chemical generation companies say you can play around with off-peak electricity rates. You can generate our chemical on site between midnight and 6 a.m. when electricity is less expensive, and you can dose it during the day. So really it's appearing in almost every possible angle. People are trying to figure out what's the effect, and it's coming both from the clients and the supply side.
And are you seeing that globally? Is that happening across the world, or are there specific countries that you're seeing that particularly pertinent in at the moment?
It's extremely prevalent in Europe, maybe a little bit less so to date in North America, but the desire to be energy independent, it's more of a strategic thing in the United States about energy independence, and it's very clearly a strong economic driver in Europe.
You've been working in this field for a long time. Let's say over the last 5-6 years or so, if we lift it up to more topic-led, what kind of things are you seeing in those approaches?
One thing that I've observed, and I think others have seen as well, is that the value propositions for the companies presenting innovations, be they startup companies or larger companies, they're becoming much crisper, much sharper. There's much more definition, whereas previously it was, we can help save the planet, or not quite that generic, but nowadays it's coming to much more sharp focus. The companies are getting better and better at articulating what their value proposition is. I also think the investors are getting sharper as well. Previously, a company would make an investment in water, but now they're going, no, I'd like to make an investment in digital water that can deal with water scarcity. It's becoming much more educated and nuanced. We're all learning, I believe, in this space, how to be more focused on the value that we're creating or delivering. That's an evolution that I've certainly noticed.
And what do you think is driving that change, Paul?
Look, there was an initial rush of enthusiasm around the time of the clean tech movement where people were rushing in to invest in water. And the only thing that happened there was many of those investments didn't make it through. There were a lot of technology companies that failed and investors that didn't make a return. And I think through that learning, people have realised that water isn't just one big monolithic thing. You've really got to understand it at a very, very granular level. You've got to decide, what part of the water sector are you playing in? Are you going after scarcity? Are you industrial? Are you corporate water related? It's the world of the many. It's a theme. More sophistication is coming to bear both from the investor side and the innovator side. You really got to know what you're doing here if you want to succeed.
So here in the UK, we've got a privatised water sector, monopoly water companies. From what I've seen, innovation is often catalysed by the sector asking for innovation. And you and I were both judges on the Ofwat Innovation Fund recently. That's how we met. So we've seen a little of how that works. Is that the same globally? Water companies pushing supply chains to try and innovate?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I loved being part of the Ofwat Breakthrough Innovation Challenge. I think it's a fantastic initiative. I think Ofwat deserve great kudos for that. But probably the hidden win for everybody was the amount of collaboration that it triggered. It brought people together in unprecedented ways to work together, and whether or not they managed to win that particular award, I think it sparked the conversation that led them to talk to one another about what they could achieve, and oftentimes that goes on, with or without that particular challenge. That's been a really great part to see, not just across all of the UK water utilities, but also uniting public sector, private sector, and internationally, bringing in international corporates, international utilities as well. Often, innovation is either being pushed or it's a call. What we're seeing right now is it's being co-created. Much of what's needed hasn't been done before. If we're to, say, create a 50-litre home, where a home can use 50 litres per person instead of 200, if we've got to get from 30% leakage to 10%, if we want to reuse water, harvest rainwater, move towards, these are not things we've done before. And we're seeing the supply chain co-creating with the end user. We see that with, say, Pepsi-Cola partnering with NX Filtration, a Dutch membrane company, to really develop that solution together, or Pepsi-Cola capturing condensates from frying potatoes in India, and they're doing that with the supply chain. They'd have to invent it together. Procter & Gamble came together with Google and utilities in Los Angeles and California, and they put in sensors to detect leaky toilets, and they found they could reduce leakage rates from 27%, down to under 10%. And that's a really cool example of a consumer goods company working with the tech company, working with the utility. So that's what we're seeing, like these really interesting radical collaborations between utilities, supply chain, and even people who are non-traditional actors as well.
And what do you think is driving the supply chain to get more invested in these kind of innovations, particularly around water consumption, for example?
On the corporate side, it's quite clear. They cannot do what they do unless they've got water. There's an existential risk to them. There's a CSR, corporate social responsibility angle to this, where they need to be seen to be good stakeholders, need to be good citizens. You can see Microsoft came under some heavy fire in the mainstream media about their water consumption at data centres in the Netherlands. So there's that side of it. But in addition to CSR, there is an existential threat. I often say that in this sector in which we work, we're wonderful at doing what we do when we have two things. When we have water and the water is manageable. But right now, the rug is being tugged out from under our feet on both those premises. You could see a hosepipe ban in the UK at the same time as sewage is washing up on the beaches of southern England. It never even gets to the wastewater treatment plant. As I see this climate change debate unfolding, I think the water sector will be like the Neville Longbottom in the Harry Potter trilogy, the kind of unlikely hero that suddenly appears in the very final novel and saves the day. We've been there quietly doing our work, and then suddenly, no, we've got to try and figure this out,
That's a brilliant analogy, Paul, that's going to stay with me beyond this interview for a long time. I hope that's the case. That's excellent. Our season sponsors for Planet Possible are Binnies, who recognise the opportunity that bringing together a breadth of professions creates to be truly amazing. Their engineers, scientists, constructors and environmental professionals collaborate to drive innovation, and Binnies, like Simon, believe that podcasts are a fantastic way to showcase some of the role models, global best practice and innovation that we have across the water and environment sector. We're grateful to Binnies for their support as it enables us to bring Planet Possible to you this season. And so let's talk a bit about some of the innovations you're seeing, because I'm really interested, particularly internationally. What are some of the really interesting approaches or examples that you've seen recently that you could share with us?
What we're seeing is things are popping up all over the world simultaneously that seem to follow a similar theme. And many of them actually harken back to older ways of managing water, things that people did for thousands and thousands of years, but perhaps were forgotten, but are being rediscovered, reinterpreted in a contemporary way for the situations that we find ourselves in today. One that I find particularly fascinating is in Peru, where they had these ancient canals that were called amunas. They were created to capture snowmelt coming down the slopes of the Andes Mountains, and they would slow it down so that it would percolate slowly into the ground. Otherwise, it would run off the side of the mountain and it would be gone. But by slowing it down in these canals, which were quite serpentine, it replenished rivers through the underground aquifer cycle so that the rivers wouldn't run dry in the summer period. And that was really by the Wari culture, which were pre-Incan. Those are being brought back into service today. They're being regenerated, restored, rediscovered, and they're helping provide water for modern day Lima, like a mega city of 10 million people, where they really do rely on the snowmelt. And if they don't hang on to that water, well, they will run out of water during the drier summer months, when that's where their pinch point is. And oftentimes, a lot of what we have with water is a variable signal, where we have too much at one time of the year and too little at another. And most of the history of our water management was flattening the signal. Just take away the variability, make it consistent, also make it move fast, in pipes and dams and reservoirs. So what we see in Peru is part of what Erica Guys, who's written a book called Water Always Wins, she describes the slow water movement. I think it's a really good term, because it sums up what we need to do to deal with stormwater, slow it down. Drought, well, slow it down and hang on to it so it doesn't wash away. And also it helps to purify the water when you get natural water systems developed. So we see this popping up in China with sponge cities. There's an advocate there called Kong Jian-yu, and he's been working tirelessly to help advocate for this in China, but it's appearing all over Southeast Asia and East Asia, from India to Singapore and elsewhere. Even in Melbourne, Australia, there's a really interesting example where they put rainwater tanks on the roofs of houses, and it's like distributed stormwater attenuation, but it's linked to weather data. So they can make this quite smart and take in Earth observation science or satellite data on weather patterns and determine whether or not we're going to experience a weather event. The tanks not only capture the rain, but they can also help to deal with stormwater issues as well. So it's a lovely example of a simple idea, but being linked with modern technology.
We're talking about the water sector kind of in isolation in some respects, Paul. And it feels to me like those things can't operate in isolation. They're intrinsically part of a bigger system. So how do you get other people that also need to be invested in things like sponge cities, for example? How do we get the great work that the Neville Longbottoms of this world are doing known so that others can connect in and play their part to make these kind of system changes that we're talking about? How do we do that?
I think if you can get people to understand the very, very important role that water plays in overall climate dynamics, that's a part of it. Currently, there's a lot of push towards decarbonisation of the water sector. I mean, you can decarbonise the water sector largely by purchasing electricity from a wind farm. But that does nothing about leakage rates. That does nothing about wasteful consumption. It doesn't do anything about that. So in many ways, you're reducing it down to something that's not maybe the most critical thing that we can do as a sector, is to leave more water for nature. People always reduce climate change down to CO2. It's a complex system. It's more than just CO2. Water is a GHG. If you put water into the upper atmosphere, it's a greenhouse gas. And we've been changing land use practices. We've been building cities, pouring concrete. You get hotspots, urban heat islands happening. If you bring water back into cities, you cool them down and you store the water. But you also have other effects as well, social effects. Like it's more pleasant to be in those places. Studies have shown reduced levels of anxiety and depression and stress if you actually have a beautiful living river in your city. Not to mention effects like an air conditioning corridor, within meters of it. So if you view water as something that's not just in isolation but linked to the climate that we're seeing, and that if we can slow the water down and keep it there, you actually help to mitigate the climate. If you're working on leak detection or you're working on water reuse or a sensor, knowing that everything you do can leave more water in a river, that kind of expands our worldview to being a bigger debate as opposed to the little piece that we do. And I think if we can have people see that in that broader context, that's the discussion that would unite policymakers, stakeholders, architects, city designers and water engineers to see holistically the important, very important role that we do play in climate dynamics. Just use less water. The minute you do that, you're using less carbon. But start there. Don't decarbonise a wasteful sector. Just stop using the water. You can get a 1 order of magnitude reduction in water if you get leakage down from 30% to 10%. If you can get residential use down from 200 litres per person to 50 litres per person. If you can do rainwater harvesting, water reuse, and then take industry, which consumes 20% of water, it's 10x. Like if you can get down to 10% to where we are, that's a huge thing. And it's made up of many little things. But collectively, it's a 10x. And I think that's how you decarbonise the sector, not just dealing with the end of the pipe and offsets and things like that.
On Planet Possible, we've talked a little bit about the value of water, and listeners may know I'm attempting to try and build a low water footprint home, and I know, Paul, you're creating even better. You're doing a water neutral home. One of the things that I found difficult is finding the technologies to help me do that and working out how to piece it all together. But one of the challenges I've had is the payback. My friends would challenge me on, well, why would I bother doing rainwater harvesting if it's going to cost me X amount to put it in, for example? How do we talk about reducing consumption and thinking about reuse in the home and grey water reuse if the payback isn't there for those technologies? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think your project sounds wonderful, the rainwater harvesting project in your home, and it really is significant. Globally, actually, a lot of cities could meet a lot of their water demands through that. Mexico City gets quite a bit of rainfall. Same in Chennai. We love water, right? You, me, probably many of the people listening to this podcast. And, there's tens of thousands of people like us out there. You meet them at CIMEM events, you meet them at various conferences. But there's billions of people out there maybe who don't connect with this. And how do you get them to love water? You know, that's the thing. I mean, I was involved in the documentary film Brave Blue World, and we featured quite a lot of really exciting solutions, and people loved learning about them. And as we thought about the next project, we thought, well, really, you got to start with the values, because if people value water, that's where everything starts. You know, you're not even going to think about rainwater harvesting if you're not thinking about it at all. If you want to get people to care, you got to kind of make it about them. But the environmental movement is too much of this kind of wagging the finger at people, and you know, you're very bad people, and you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. But like, everyone loves going to a river. Everybody feels a sense of peace or well-being when they're near that. There's also a sense of where we're from, place, identity. I'm sure in the city where you live, there's probably a river. In the city where I live, I can see the river almost from where I am right now. And that's bound up in all the mythology, the history of this place. And for everybody around the world, it is working with something that would connect people in the right brain. You know, you can tell people facts and figures, left brain. You know, there's 30% leakage. Oh, that's terrible, there's 30% leakage. And then they go back to doing what they're doing. You tell them, you know, that chalk river? Oh, it's kind of sad, you know, there's not enough water for the fish anymore. And it's a really nice river. And isn't that a shame? And we go, yeah, it is actually. I really like that chalk river. My dad goes fly fishing, or they relate to it in some personal way. And then you say, yeah, well, you know what? That 20% leakage, that's why there's no water in the chalk river. And now you've kind of drawn a line between the emotional heartstring, which is kind of what you need to feel. People are emotional beings. So that's some of what I've been thinking about in terms of how you actually get the change to happen. More, not just with the tens of thousands of people, but but you don't need to get 8 billion people either. The good news is you only need to get about 15 or 20% of a social group to flip, and then the rest of the group apparently moves with it. So as long as you win the hearts and minds of 15 to 20% of the people, you're moving in the right direction.
Okay, Paul, so final question for you, and I always like to ask guests this. So if I could give you the Planet Possible magic wand, what would you make possible?
I would like to cast a spell on everybody so that when they wake up tomorrow morning, they will all have fallen in love with water. They would look at it a little bit differently, and they'd feel a sense of, they'd care about it, you know, they'd value it. And if they valued it, well, then everything else will flow from there. You know, we won't want to pollute it, we won't want to waste it. Actually, that's the motivation for a new film project that we're just beginning, the very, very start of our journey on, which is called Our Blue World. And it's really about the human connection with water and trying to make people realise that this is a story about them. It's a story about who we are, where we've come from, what we believe in, what we feel, where we're going. And if we can make people relate to this in terms of identity, place, culture, spirituality, well-being, I think we bring them along with us on this journey. So, you know, if any of the listeners have stories, examples, we'd love to hear from them. How do we relate to it? If you're from somewhere, that river is part of your cultural history or narrative where you came from. You know, if you're North American, Mark Twain's Mississippi. If you're Chinese, it's the Mekong, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, the Pearl River. It finds its way through in so many different aspects of our lives that we don't always register or think about. And I think connecting those stories and what we used to do, like how did we manage water before and how can we learn from that? Not just, and you got this kind of modern technology versus ancient wisdom, and combining those two. Those are the type of stories that we're looking to tell in this next film project. Again, we're at the very start of the journey with it, so it's a very good time to be hearing from folks.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. What a great note to end it on. We'll certainly put the details in the show notes. Paul, it was a pleasure to have you on Planet Possible. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks a million, Niki. It was a pleasure.
So, Angela, what are your initial reflections on the interview with Paul?
I love his passion and I love the depth of knowledge and especially globally. The bits that really kind of resonated with me was around the radical collaboration part, because this is the bit that actually I find most exciting about what's happening in innovation in the water sector at the moment. In that we were in this world, certainly I've been in now about 4 years, and when I first came in, I couldn't believe the lack of collaboration and the lack of dialogue across the different water companies who all had the same challenges. And yes, there are nuances. Some of us are urban, some of us are rural. Our topological and geographical challenges may be a little bit different, but really, the challenges are still the same. And I think that over the 4 years, the level of trust and relationship and collaboration has absolutely exploded. And this is, to me, is the best bit. And ultimately, we're all doing this to give the best value and services to our customers. And we can do that by working together because we're not competing. So I'm really elated that this collaboration within our own sector is happening. However, the opportunity that does exist, which taps into really what Paul was saying, is around radical collaboration. Some of the solutions to what I'm looking for are already in existence in other places. And now my job is to go and find those. So it is by kicking off different collaborations with other sectors, with other geographies, and the unlikely stuff, because it's always at the edges where the sparks fly and the exciting stuff happens. And that's really where I want to be. So it was brilliant to hear Paul's thoughts on that.
Well, you started to touch on the kind of idea of collaboration and co-creation. I'm hearing that term being used. Paul mentioned it. It feels like that's happening in the innovation landscape a bit more. Is co-creation something that you're exploring at Northumbrian Water?
Yes, very much so. We're very much partnering with businesses probably at an earlier stage than perhaps we would have typically done so. So they've got an interesting technology that isn't just quite at the commercial level of readiness. However, we're now working together to co-create those products that are new to the world with those businesses. So then we win because we have a solution, and they win because then they've got a viable product that then they can hopefully go and be successful in the market outside of ourselves. However, the R&D stuff can be a lot slower burn, but is actually putting in knowledge that actually isn't there. If we've backed the right horses, will actually really pay dividend and really give us something to build on for the future. And there are some really interesting stuff in that sort of like earlier development phase. It's really important that we're putting the time and the effort to understand properly now.
And are you seeing co-creation happening in the R&D space as well, or is that very much an innovation tool?
No, I would say co-creation would very much be a part of what we're doing with university and academic institutes, because it is a collaboration. So although we might fund, but we're still actively involved in the shaping of the PhD projects and in the outputs of how we actually then use that knowledge. Very much co-creation.
And you talk a little bit about R&D and innovation as being a half-half split in your team. Do you think as a sector, have we got the balance right between innovation and R&D? Because we talk a lot about innovation. This podcast is called Innovation. It's not called R&D and innovation. So have we got the balance right? Do I need to change the title?
I think that because of all what's been going on in innovation, the pendulum has definitely swung in that innovation is kind of like the poster child right now, the one that everybody's talking about. It's also, if I'm really being really probably very biased, is the lovely shiny, the new, the faster paced stuff, which is definitely the stuff that I really enjoy. However, I do feel as if we cannot lose focus on the importance of the R&D work that needs to be done in the sector, because there's a whole load of things that we need to be ready for the future, that even science or technology is not at that level of readiness yet. And we need to make sure that we're putting in those foundations in order to make sure that we are ready.
So we've talked a little bit about the Ofwat Fund in the interview with Paul. Paul and I obviously met through that route. It's had a bit of an impact, I think, on the sector. From your perspective as a head of innovation and a water company who's putting entries into those various funds, what are some of the lessons that you've learned so far from those competitions?
I obviously think that it's an amazing opportunity for us as the water sector to actually gain this funding in order to extend the capability that we have in our business to actually run projects that we would never normally have the opportunity to do. So I really welcome it and think that it's a brilliant opportunity. However, the workload that comes with that is probably something that's been a little bit of a surprise to everybody. And we're all having to reorganise our teams a little bit in order to cope with this. But I think that what's being asked is right, because when you're being awarded funding, certainly up to millions of pounds, it needs to be really well thought through, well considered. I've done a little bit of analysis of what we've done at Northumbrian. So we've put in 22 bids. We've been successful in 8 of those. And we've worked with 91 partners across all of those submissions. This is great for us. We've already got capacity to do this. But I think that perhaps if you're one of the smaller companies or one of the water-only companies, I think then it is a real challenge for you to really actively engage in this with the same level of vigour, because it does take up that time. So maybe the balance needs to be looked at a little bit there.
And it's just making me think, you run the very successful Northumbrian Water Innovation Festival. I'm biased, but I have been, and I think it's amazing. Do you think there's a role for maybe that festival or that kind of approach to supporting or dovetailing things like the Innovation Fund? Is there a role for those things to align more closely, do you think?
Absolutely. The Innovation Festival has always been a brilliant vehicle for us for new idea generation or for accelerating projects that we've had. But now the Ofwat Fund has come along. We've had 3 winners that have come through and have been created at the Innovation Festival. And this year we had a real focus on that. So we were really clear and explicit that the idea and intent of some of the different sprints was to actually form the consortia and then put in an Ofwat bid out the back. So we would very much welcome other companies to take the benefit of that. So this year, for the first time, Thames actually led a sprint at our festival. And again, they were looking at their no-dig innovation bid to really put some legs behind that. We also had Southern Water and Yorkshire Water who co-led a sprint with us around sewer mapping. And again, Yorkshire are actually going to lead that one into the innovation process for this time. So you're right, it's already forming that place where not only we can do it, but other water companies. We had 38 sectors, I had over 600 organisations, so it couldn't be a better place for you to make some new relationships and actually making a difference to the sector.
Also, there's free ice cream, which, I mean, you had me at hello with free ice cream. So no, it's a fantastic few days. So we've talked a lot about technological innovation, haven't we, really? And we've talked about shiny products. Where else are you seeing the need beyond technology for the sector to be innovative?
There are 2 key spaces that I see need some work. So the first one is probably the role I took on 4 years ago, is that the culture within the businesses needs help. So then everybody is an innovator. Innovation is the worst word. Half the planet don't even know what it is or what it even means. And I have to say, my mum still says to me, so what is it that you do again? You're like, it's just not that clear, is it? If you think about the water sector workforce, where we have probably about a third of our workers who are in a sort of like a field related activity, the word innovation probably doesn't mean a great deal to them either. Whereas everybody has within them an innovation capability that they could actually leverage in order to do what they do even better. That's a huge piece of work that we're working on at the moment, to really enable everybody in the workforce to be able to innovate. And this is something that I'm really passionate about. So the people bit is one thing. And then the other bit that I think we have not got right yet is that there might be loads of brilliant technologies out there. I can't afford them. With the constraints that we have as a sector, we just need some different business models in order to enable us to really embrace some of the brilliant technologies that are out there. So again, this is another area in which I'm really keen to work with businesses to really change up how we can make these technologies part of what we do on a daily basis. And I guess being maybe slightly contentious, our regulator. We very much need to be regulated, and I think that we now have a brilliant relationship with the regulator. However, if you look at some of the things that are currently happening, so for example, the Reg 31, you need to have approval to be able to put a piece of equipment into a live main to make sure that it is safe for drinking water. Very important. We don't want to poison anybody. You know, it can be that you have like a very big backlog, 6 months plus, of a new company that's got a great new technology, and we're stuck in this process. And that could be the life or death of a little business, a small business that is looking, to grow. And then these delays are just a disaster. And there are a few other examples around the explosive risk in sewers and some of the other processes that are currently set up by our regulator that perhaps are hindering innovation a little bit.
So culture, kind of cost, and then regulation. We're running out of time. This always happens. It's a shame. But if I was to ask you one last question, it's the magic one. So let's channel in a Neville Longbottom, loving the Harry Potter references from Paul there. If I passed you the Planet Possible magic wand, Angela, what would you want to make possible?
There's obviously been a huge focus on the level of river water quality and how we're going about that. So my wish for would be that I have the technology at the right price point to be able to do the right thing in that space. And that would be gold dust right now.
Amazing. Well, really clear. And I think there's a lot of people that feel very similarly. So what a brilliant point to end today's episode on. Angela, thank you so much. Time has flown by. And here we are, not only at the end of this episode, but also this series of Planet Possible. Thank you so much for joining us. I really hope you found the whole series really insightful. I hope it's given you something to think about in your world. We're going to take a little break before season 4 starts, but there are plenty of back episodes to catch up on, and keep an eye out for some audio specials that we've recorded before season 4 begins. You can subscribe to Planet Possible on your usual podcast player to never miss an episode, and we'd love to hear your ratings and reviews too. I'm really looking forward to bringing season 4 to you, so all that leaves me to say is a huge thank you to our guest today, Paula Callahan, and my excellent co-host, Angela MacOscar. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be part of Planet Possible.
Oh, great to have you here. That's it, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Planet Possible is produced by Bwlb. Bwlb Bwlb. The best ideas, the strongest content.